This is probably the best gimbal I've ever used over many years of creating real estate media. But is this the right gimbal for you? The Zhiyun Crane 4 is a robust yet lightweight gimbal that can handle very heavy payloads, and although I do love using their Weebill 3E for lightweight cameras like the GH5 Mark II, the Crane 4 has impressive features and options that make it a versatile gimbal at an affordable price, especially for heavier setups using full-frame cameras and bigger lenses. So after I reviewed the Weebill 3E, Zhiyun sent me this Crane 4 and they said, hey, give it a try, see what you think. And I ended up keeping it, and I wanted to do a review video on it because I do stand behind this gimbal after putting it through its paces. But once again, this is not necessarily the gimbal for every situation and for everybody. So what I want to do is, in this video, I want to break down the Crane 4. Now, if you want to see a review video on the Weebill 3E, I have a link to that down in the description of this video, my review on that. But here in the Crane 4, I want to show what makes it stand out. What are the features that I really liked about the Crane 4 and that also make it stand out from its closest competitor. So cutting to the chase, the most important thing, is this a stable gimbal? Every piece of footage I captured was very smooth. Stability is very impressive with no jitter, smooth transitions, and best of all, I didn't have to do any special tweaks to the motor settings. I just did an auto calibration, also known as an auto tune, like you would do with any other gimbal, and it was good to go. But with all gimbals, you probably will at some point need to make some adjustments to like your motor torque, your deadband, things like that. So that doesn't make it different necessarily from any gimbal, that it's all just plug and play, but it goes to show you just how stable this was just right out of the box. In fact, all of this test footage that you've been watching, all of this was shot at 4K 30p, so it is not slowed down and there was no warp stabilization applied to any of this in post-processing. As you can see, the footage is very smooth straight out of camera using the Crane 4. Now, the Crane 4 is going to be heavier than your Weebill 3E, but there's an advantage to this in that the Crane 4 has the sling arm and also a wrist rest. And that sling arm can be used as a dual grip, or it can be used also as just underhand so that you can get very low and then lift the gimbal all the way up. But both of those features with that sling arm and the wrist rest, it gives you a more ergonomical setup as you're carrying your gimbal, and also versatility on different type of shots you might want to capture. The closest competitor, if you want to compare the Crane 4 to something that's almost apples to apples, that would be the DJI RS4 Pro. And that's because the RS4 Pro would more closely match the payload capacity of the Crane 4. But while the Crane 4 can handle 13-pound load capacity and the RS4 Pro is 10 pounds, the Crane 4 is also about $120 less than the RS4 Pro when it's not on sale. So the Crane 4 can handle about 3 more pounds than what the RS4 Pro can, and also the Crane 4 is a little bit cheaper. Now, there are a lot of features that are almost identical across these gimbals, but I really want to show some things that really make it stand out on the Crane 4 side. Something also you'll see on the RS4 Pro is it does have, like the Crane 4 does, the ability to have a native vertical mount, so that you don't have to add any wonky hardware or carry the gimbal in any awkward position. This is a major plus if you want to capture both walkthrough videos and reels at a gig, because all you have to do is just flip the hardware around. There's no other special hardware you have to get. Yeah, you do have to rebalance your gimbal before you do each one of these setups between your portrait and your landscape orientations. But it's really quick to do that, and it's much better than trying to get some wonky hardware or doing some of this weird holding the gimbal like a flashlight mode type of thing you might have seen with other gimbals. Having that vertical mount is a big one if you're going to be doing any vertical type of videos. But a big one for me when it came to the Crane 4 that really makes this stand out is that it has the ability to tweak the axes in the tilt and roll. So what happens sometimes, for instance, this camera here, the Z6 that's mounted on here, it has a slight manufacturing defect. I've had this thing for many years, and on old gimbals like the Ronin S, I would just put a little shim underneath of the hardware that it was mounted on, and it compensated for that. So every time I double tap the trigger to bring it back up into its zeroed position where it's all level, I didn't have to then mess mess around with the joystick or whatnot. I just put the shim in there, it was fine, but you don't have to do that with the Crane 4. So with the Crane 4, you can then adjust the tilt axis and also the roll axis so you can compensate for any type of little manufacturing defect that you might have in your camera's body or other mounting hardware that you put on that. And that's something to really consider when you're thinking about having a bigger gimbal with a heavier payload. You're going to have more things then applied to it. You're going to have more weight on the gimbal. If you find that you're off by just a little bit, you just tweak it in the menu, you're good to go. The Crane 4 has kind of a neat little nifty thing on these lights that are on each one of the motors. Normally they're going to show white, so if you're balanced very well, each one of those motors will show white. If you're not balanced, then the motor that's having the issue is going to light up red. So immediately you can tell if you're doing a whole bunch of stuff and all of a sudden the motor turns red, you have a bit of a problem. You might need to go back and rebalance the gimbal. Is it necessary? No. Is it nice? Yeah, of course. It's nice to be able to see how well you're balancing, especially if you're new to videography and you're new to gimbals as well. Something else that's kind of neat, it's more so for doing talking head videos, but when it comes to real estate, also when you're doing close-ups, is there is a built-in light. So this little fill light up here is built into the gimbal. You don't have to add it, and you can adjust the brightness, and you can also adjust the color temperature of that fill light as well. Once again, it's completely built into the gimbal. You don't have to add another light on top of your camera. It's not going to light an entire room, but for close-ups and also a little bit of fill when you're doing videos of people, maybe some talking head videos, it can be helpful. So those are the major features. Those are the things that really make it stand out. If I were to be looking at a gimbal and I'm thinking, well, should I be using like the Weebill 3E, some lightweight gimbal like that? Should I be using the Crane 4? Should I be using DJI's RS4 Pro if I'm going to go that big? Well, the deciding factors really come down first. Do you need a small gimbal or a big gimbal? The 3E is only going to handle about 6 pounds, but for most setups that are only about 2 pounds, like using the GH5 Mark II by Lumix with that little Laowa 7.5 millimeter MFT lens on there, that doesn't hardly weigh anything. So using a Weebill 3E, that's definitely the call, because a big gimbal like this, you're going to have a heavier gimbal than your camera setup. So if you're into using then a bigger camera, you've got, let's say, a full frame camera, you've got also a big lens on it, and that's what you want to use for your video setup, great. That's what these bigger gimbals are for. Then it comes down to the deciding factor, well, should you be going with like DJI or Zhiyun or something else? Well, the two top ones are, of course, DJI and Zhiyun, and once again, the RS4 Pro is the closest competitor to the Crane 4. But the Crane 4 does cost less, about $120 less, if neither one of those gimbals are on sale. You will, though, find, I think, some better features inside the Crane 4, so it is my recommendation that if you are looking for something that is for a heavier setup, give the Crane 4 a try, see how it works for you. And once again, if you want to see my review video on the lighter weight gimbal on the Weebill 3E, I have a link to that down in the description of this video.